The shocking will. David Carter sat in his tiny apartment, staring at the blinking red light on his communication console. He hesitated before pressing the button. The deep robotic voice spoke. "David Carter, you have been summoned to the Galactic High Court of Velmora. Your presence is required for the reading of the last will of Sarvex." David's heart stopped for a second. Vex was dead. Sarvex had been one of the few aliens David could call a friend. They met years ago when David worked as a cargo pilot. Sarvex had saved his life once, pulling him from a burning wreck after an ambush in a lawless sector. They had stayed in touch, sharing drinks and stories across the galaxy. But David had no idea his friend was even sick, let alone close to death. Now he was being summoned to some alien court. Why? He booked the fastest transport to Velmora, his mind racing with questions. The courtroom of Velmora. The courtroom was vast and filled with alien species of all kinds. David felt out of place in his worn-out jacket and dusty boots. The judge, a tall creature with 4 glowing eyes, called for silence. "We are gathered to execute the final will of Sarvex, honorable citizen of the Orion Alliance," the judge announced. A hologram flickered to life in the center of the courtroom. Sarvex's familiar face appeared, his golden eyes twinkling with mischief even in death. "David, my friend, if you are hearing this, then I am gone," the hologram said. "I always believed in repaying debts. You once said I saved your life. Now I am giving you mine." David's stomach twisted. What did that mean? "I leave all my wealth, my home, my starship, and my estate to David Carter." The room exploded in whispers. David blinked, thinking he had misheard. "Wait, what?" he muttered. The judge continued reading. "In addition to all assets, I also leave David Carter the guardianship and companionship of my bonded partner, Luraya." David nearly choked. What? Meeting Luraya. Minutes later, in a private chamber, David stood awkwardly as the doors slid open. Luraya entered. She was tall, graceful, and undeniably alien. Her violet skin shimmered under the dim lights, and her silver eyes studied him with calm intensity. A deep blue robe draped over her slender form, making her look like royalty. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then, in a smooth voice, she said, "You are David Carter." David cleared his throat. Yeah. And you're Luraya." She nodded, stepping closer. "Sarvex trusted you. That means I must, too." David ran a hand through his hair. "Look, there's been a mistake. I didn't expect this. I don't know what to do with an inheritance. And I definitely don't know what to do with." He gestured vaguely toward her. Bonded partner." Luraya's expression remained unreadable. Bonded does not mean owned, human. I am not an object to be claimed. David winced. "Right. Sorry. This is just a lot." Luraya studied him for a moment before saying, "Sarvex was murdered." David froze. "What?" Her voice was steady, but her silver eyes darkened. His death was not natural. And now you have everything he owned. That makes you a target. David's blood turned cold. Target? For what? Luraya glanced at the door. They are already watching. We must leave. Now. David turned, noticing, for the first time, the strange figures in the hallway. Their eyes locked onto him. He had walked into something far bigger than he had ever imagined. And there was no turning back. A dangerous gift. David's heartbeat pounded in his ears as Luraya's warning settled over him like a storm cloud. Murdered. He barely had time to process those words before she grabbed his wrist and pulled him through a hidden side door. The hallway outside the courtroom was dimly lit, stretching into eerie silence. "Where are we going?" David whispered, glancing back. The figures who had been watching him were now moving, shadowy figures gliding toward them with purpose. Luraya didn't look back. "Away from here. They won't attack in the courthouse. Too many witnesses, But once we leave, that's another story. David felt sweat prick his skin. Who are they? People who wanted Sarvex dead. And now, they want you dead too. David swallowed hard. Great. I came here expecting a lawyer's office, and now I'm running for my life. Lurea led him through a side corridor, past towering alien statues and ancient carvings glowing with soft blue light. The courthouse was a relic of a long-forgotten civilization, now repurposed for intergalactic justice. But at this moment, it felt like a tomb. As they turned a corner, a door ahead slid open automatically, revealing a landing platform. A sleek black transport ship hovered in place, waiting. In. Now. Lurea ordered. David hesitated. He barely knew this woman. He barely understood what was happening. But the look in her silver eyes wasn't one of deception, it was urgency. And behind them, footsteps echoed closer. He ran. The chase begins. The moment they stepped onto the platform, a voice crackled through the intercom. David Carter, step away from the female and surrender the inheritance. This is your only warning. David turned and saw them. 4 humanoid figures in dark armor, their helmets sleek and expressionless. Each of them held a weapon that looked far more advanced than anything he wanted to be on the receiving end of. Lurea stepped in front of him, her voice low. Keep moving. David's throat went dry. They have guns. And I have. Confusion. One of the figures took a step forward, raising their weapon. Last chance. Lurea exhaled sharply, then moved faster than David thought possible. She pulled a small curved blade from her robe, and, in a single motion, slashed through the air. A streak of blue energy erupted from the blade, cutting through the nearest attacker's weapon, slicing it in half. Sparks flew. Run, she shouted. David didn't need to be told twice. He bolted toward the ship, Lurea beside him. Blaster shots erupted behind them. One shot whizzed past David's ear, close enough that he felt the heat. His instincts screamed at him to duck, but Lurea was already pulling him through the ship's entrance. The doors slammed shut, sealing them inside. Lurea rushed to the cockpit, fingers flying over the controls. Hold on. David barely had time to grab a seat before the ship shot into the sky. The force of the acceleration slammed him back, knocking the breath from his lungs. Through the viewport, he saw the dark armored attackers growing smaller below, their weapons firing uselessly into the air. But they weren't giving up. 2 sleek fighter ships detached from the station and rocketed after them. Are you serious? David groaned, gripping the edge of his seat. Lurea's hands were steady on the controls. It won't let us leave alive. We either outrun them or fight back. David let out a nervous laugh. I don't know if you've noticed, but I'm not exactly a fighter pilot. She didn't look at him. Then you better become one. Now. Secrets of the starship. David stumbled to the weapons console as the ship jolted from enemy fire. His hands hovered over the controls, overwhelmed by the flashing symbols and alien script. I don't know how to use this. Lurea reached over and pressed a switch. The symbols transformed into English. David blinked. Oh, well, that's convenient. Sarvex prepared for you. Now shoot. David gulped and gripped the targeting controls. Red lock-on symbols danced across the screen, chasing the enemy fighters as they zipped through space. The ship shook again from another hit. Warning lights flashed. David took a deep breath, steadied his hands, and squeezed the trigger. A burst of plasma fire erupted from their ship. One of the enemy fighters swerved, barely dodging the blast. The other wasn't so lucky. The plasma shot tore through its wing, sending it spiraling into space before exploding. David let out a breath. Holy, I actually hit it. Lurea smirked. Do it again. David adjusted his aim and fired again. This time, the second fighter dodged, looping around to flank them. It's getting behind us, he warned. Lurea spun the ship into a sharp turn, gravity pressing them into their seats. Not for long. With a sudden maneuver, She twisted the ship into a reverse position, facing their pursuer head-on. David took the shot. The enemy fighter erupted in flames, debris scattering into the void. Silence filled the cockpit. The only sound was David's rapid breathing. "Did we just?" he asked. Loraya nodded. "We won." David exhaled, slumping back in his seat. Then his gaze drifted to Loraya. "All right. No more running. Tell me everything. Why did Starvex leave me all this? And why are people trying to kill me for it?" Loraya hesitated, then stood, crossing the room. She reached into a compartment and pulled out a small, glowing cube. "Because of this," she said softly. David frowned. "A cube." She met his gaze. "Not just any cube. This is what got Starvex killed. And now, it belongs to you." David stared at the mysterious object, feeling the sinking weight in his chest. Whatever was happening, it was far from over. Running from shadows, David sat in the dimly lit cockpit, staring at the glowing cube in Loraya's hands. It pulsed with soft blue light, casting eerie shadows across her face. "Okay," he said, rubbing his temples. "You want to tell me why I just had to gun down 2 guys in space over a glowing box?" Loraya sighed, placing the cube carefully on the console. "This isn't just a box, David. It's a key." David raised an eyebrow. "A key? To what?" She hesitated before answering. "To something that should have stayed hidden. But now, it's yours." David let out a dry laugh. "Oh, wonderful. So I've inherited death threats, a chase across the galaxy, and a puzzle box with no instructions. Best will reading ever." Loraya shot him a sharp look. "Starvex trusted you. He believed you were the only one who could protect this." David exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "Look, I liked Starvex. He was a great guy. But I'm just a cargo pilot. Why would he pick me?" Loraya's expression softened, "Because he knew you wouldn't sell it. He knew you wouldn't give it to the wrong people." David frowned. "And who are the wrong people?" Loraya's silver eyes darkened. "The people who are coming for us right now." A sudden alarm blared through the cockpit. David spun toward the control panel. "What now?" Loraya's fingers flew across the console. "We've been tracked. Someone planted a signal beacon on the ship." David's stomach dropped. "Tracked? By who?" She grimaced. "The Crimson Moss Syndicate." David stared at her. "Please tell me that's just a bad rock band." She didn't smile. "They're a mercenary group, highly paid, highly lethal, and they don't stop until they get what they want." David groaned. "Let me guess. They want the cube." Loraya nodded. "And they'll kill us for it." A desperate escape. The ship's sensors beeped wildly. Loraya pointed at the screen, showing 3 red blips closing in fast. 3 ships incoming. Heavily armed. "We can't outgun them." David clenched his jaw. "Then we outrun them. Can't we jump to hyperspace?" Loraya shook her head. "The beacon is still active. Even if we jump, they'll follow us. We need to remove it first." David frowned. "And how exactly do we do that?" She gestured toward the back of the ship. "The beacon is likely attached to the hull. We'll have to go out there and detach it manually." David's stomach twisted. "You mean, like a spacewalk?" "In the middle of a chase." Loraya nodded. "Unless you'd rather get blown up." David sighed. "Fine. But if I get lost in space, I'm haunting you." Loraya smirked. "Noted. Dancing with death." Minutes later, David stood inside the airlock, secured in a pressurized spacesuit. The emergency lights flickered as the ship rocked from incoming blaster fire. Loraya's voice crackled through the comms. "You have 3 minutes before they get in firing range. Make it fast." David took a deep breath. The airlock hissed open, and he stepped into the void. The vastness of space stretched endlessly around him. Stars burned in the distance, indifferent to the chaos unfolding in their shadow. David forced himself to focus. He used his suit's thrusters to drift along the ship's hull, searching for the beacon. There, a small blinking red device was attached near the rear thruster. David activated the magnetic clamps on his boots, locking himself in place. He reached out, fumbling with the device. It was welded on tight. Laraya's voice came through. 1 minute, David. They're almost in range. Yeah, working on it. David grunted, pulling at the beacon. It refused to budge. Then he noticed something. A small control panel. A passcode lock. Oh, come on. Laraya's voice turned urgent. David, you need to hurry. David exhaled sharply. Think, Carter. Think. Zarvex was smart. He wouldn't make this impossible. If he had put a failsafe in the ship, it had to be something he could remember. Then it hit him. Zarvex's favorite number, 3117. David punched in the code. The beacon's clamps hissed and loosened. He grabbed the device, yanking it free. Got it. Laraya didn't waste a second. Hold on. The moment David pushed off the hull, the ship lurched into an emergency hyperspace jump. The force sent him tumbling, his tether yanking hard as he was snapped back toward the airlock. His heart thundered as the stars blurred into streaks of light. Then, as suddenly as it started, everything stopped. The ship stabilized. The airlock hissed open, and David collapsed inside, gasping for breath. Laraya's face appeared above him. Not bad, human. David groaned. Yeah? Next time, you do it. She chuckled and helped him up. But the relief was short-lived, because when they checked the nav system, they realized something was wrong. A wrong turn into the unknown. David frowned at the blinking screen. Where exactly are we? Laraya's expression darkened. This isn't where I set the jump coordinates. The ship's AI chimed in, its voice calm but unsettling. Warning, you have entered restricted space. Proceeding further may result in extreme danger. David's stomach twisted. Define extreme danger. Before the AI could answer, the ship's alarms screamed again. A massive shadow loomed ahead. A colossal alien battleship, unlike anything David had ever seen. It was old, covered in strange, flickering symbols. And it was waking up. Laraya's eyes widened. That's impossible. David clenched his fists. Yeah. Well, so is my whole day. Then, a deep alien voice rumbled through the ship's speakers. You have something that belongs to us. David and Laraya exchanged glances. They weren't alone. And this was only the beginning. The key to everything. The alien battleship loomed ahead, a giant floating monolith covered in pulsing blue symbols. It was old, far older than anything David had seen before. It didn't move. It didn't attack. But it was awake. And something inside was watching them. Laraya's fingers tightened on the control panel. This ship isn't supposed to exist. David leaned forward, scanning the readouts. Well, it does. And it's right in front of us. So, care to explain? Laraya shook her head. I've only seen sketches. It's from the Lost Age, the Dusk Era. Before the Orion Alliance, before the Galactic Senate, before everything we know. David's stomach twisted. How lost are we talking? She exhaled. Over 100,000 years. No one has ever found a ship from that time. Until now. David didn't like the way she said that. And I'm guessing that's bad news. Before she could answer, the deep, rumbling voice echoed again through the ship's speakers. You have something that belongs to us. The words weren't just sound. They carried weight, like a force pressing against David's chest. He glanced at Laraya, who looked just as alarmed. David cleared his throat. Okay. Who exactly are you? Silence. Then the voice came again. Bring the key inside, or be erased. David exchanged looks with Laraya. So, I'm guessing we don't have a choice, he muttered. She sighed. We could run. The ship's AI interrupted. Sensors indicate power surge from unknown vessel. Probability of destruction upon movement, 99.7%. David winced. Yeah. No. Let's not run. Loraya studied him. Then we go inside. David groaned. Great. I love walking into creepy, ancient death traps. He picked up the glowing cube, its soft blue light flickering in his hands. The moment his fingers closed around it, the alien battleship's doors slid open, welcoming them inside. A forgotten tomb. David and Loraya stepped off their ship, entering the alien vessel. The air was thick, not with dust, but with something else. Something ancient, something waiting. The walls pulsed with faint light, like veins running through a massive body. The symbols shifted, changing as they walked, as if they were being watched. David kept his voice low. Remind me again why we're walking into the haunted spaceship. Loraya gave him a look. Because the alternative is getting blasted into space dust. David sighed. Right. That. They moved deeper into the ship. With each step, the walls reacted, the blue symbols glowing brighter, then dimming again, like they were alive. Then, without warning, the floor beneath them vanished. David barely had time to shout before they were falling. The chamber of echoes. David hit the ground hard, rolling to absorb the impact. Loraya landed beside him, more gracefully. They had fallen into a massive chamber. And they were not alone. Rows of figures stood frozen in place. Towering beings encased in dark metallic armor, their faces hidden behind smooth, featureless helmets. They stood in perfect formation, unmoving like statues. David pushed himself up, his pulse hammering. Okay. That's not terrifying at all. Loraya's voice was tight. They're soldiers. David swallowed. Yeah, but dead soldiers, right? Loraya hesitated. I don't know. Then a soft sound echoed. A breath. David's heart stopped. One of the armored figures shifted. Then another. And another. One by one, the statues began to move. David took a step back. Nope. 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 I hate this. Loraya grabbed his wrist. Stay calm. Oh yeah, hard to stay calm when a bunch of ancient warrior ghosts are waking up. The deep voice returned, louder this time. The HFY. Haze or E2RNED. David felt the cube in his hands grow hot. The symbols around them flared to life. The figures stood at attention. Then one stepped forward. Unlike the others, its armor was more elaborate, marked with glowing sigils. It turned toward David, its helmet splitting apart like petals unfolding. A face emerged. Not mechanical. Not alien. Human. David's breath caught. What the hell? The figure studied him, then spoke. At last, the hair has come. David blinked. Hair? Hair to what? The figure stepped closer. To the forgotten throne. To the last empire of humanity. David's mind reeled. Wait. Hold on. The last empire of humanity. What are you talking about? The figure tilted its head. You do not know. David clenched his fists. No. I don't know. I was a cargo pilot yesterday. Now I'm inheriting ancient keys and getting chased by killers. The figure regarded him for a moment, then looked to Loraya. You are his protector. She hesitated before nodding. Yes. The figure nodded. Then listen well, both of you. Before the Orion Alliance, before the rise of the Galactic Senate, before the fall of all known empires, there was humanity. David swallowed. I know that. We're still around. The figure shook its head. No. You are what remains. The words felt like a hammer to his chest. The figure continued. Long ago, humanity was not scattered, not weak. We ruled. We were gods among the stars. But we fell, and the universe forgot us. David's mouth felt dry. What happened? The figure's expression darkened. The war. The betrayal, the burning of our last city, the fall of our throne. Laraya's voice was barely above a whisper. You're saying, humanity once had an empire, and it was erased from history. The figure nodded. And now, the key has been found. The last hair stands before me. David exhaled shakily. Okay. Cool. No pressure. The figure turned toward a massive set of doors at the far end of the chamber. They were covered in glowing symbols identical to those on the cube. The vault awaits. David looked at Laraya. She nodded. They stepped forward, and the doors began to open. Betrayal in the stars. The enormous doors groaned open, revealing a chamber bathed in golden light. Strange, metallic structures pulsed with energy, stretching toward the ceiling like the ribs of some massive creature. The air felt thick, charged with something ancient, something powerful. David hesitated at the threshold, gripping the glowing cube tighter. Laraya stood beside him, eyes scanning every inch of the vault. The armored figure, the ancient warrior who had called him Hair, stepped forward. His deep voice echoed in the chamber. This is the heart of what remains, the last vault of the forgotten empire. David took a slow breath. Okay, so what's in it? Gold? Weapons? A map to some superweapon? The warrior turned to face him. Knowledge. David blinked. Knowledge. The warrior nodded. And power. He gestured toward a raised platform in the center of the room. Upon it sat a massive crystalline structure, pulsing with light. Unlike anything David had ever seen, it shifted, as if it were both solid and liquid at the same time. The warrior spoke again. This is the Mind Core, the last remnant of the High Council's wisdom, the final record of humanity's golden age, and the key to reclaiming what was lost. David frowned. Reclaiming? You mean? The warrior nodded. To awaken the old empire. David exhaled sharply. Okay, hold on. You're telling me I have the key to restart an entire civilization that's been dead for 100,000 years? The warrior tilted his head. If you wish, or you may leave, and let it remain forgotten. David's mind reeled. He was nobody. Just a cargo pilot who had been thrown into this mess because his friend, now dead, had left him an inheritance he didn't understand. And now he was standing in the ruins of a forgotten empire, being asked to decide its fate. His hands clenched into fists. This wasn't his fight. It couldn't be. But then he glanced at Laraya. She was staring at him, not with expectation, not with fear, but with something else. Trust. David exhaled. All right. Say I do this. What happens next? The warrior gestured to the Mind Core. The knowledge within will guide you. But beware. There are those who do not wish for this empire to return. David frowned. Like who? Like the ones who already rule. A chill ran down his spine. The Galactic Senate, the Orion Alliance, the powerful factions that had built their empires over the ruins of the old. They would never allow humanity's return. Before David could respond, a deep rumble shook the chamber. Laraya's eyes snapped to the entrance. Something's wrong. Then, boom. The vault doors exploded. The betrayal, smoke filled the chamber as figures stormed in, weapons raised. David's heart sank. Crimson Maw. The mercenary group that had been chasing them from the beginning. Their armor gleamed under the golden light, and at their center stood a familiar figure, a towering warlord in battle-scarred armor. General Core. David's fists clenched. You again. Core smirked. I told you, Carter. Hand over the key, and you get to walk away. David glanced at the Mind Core. The true inheritance. The history, the power, the legacy of humanity. He turned back to Core. Not happening. Core sighed. Then you die. He snapped his fingers. Blasters fired. David barely had time to react before the ancient warriors moved. With a flash of energy, the silent statues in the room came to life. Their armor ignited with blue fire, and their eyes glowed like burning stars. They charge. The Crimson Maw mercenaries didn't even have time to scream. The battle erupted in the heart of the vault, ancient warriors clashing with modern mercenaries. Plasma bolts flew, swords of pure energy sliced through the air, and the walls trembled with the force of the fight. David grabbed Luria's wrist. "We need to get to the mind core. Now." She nodded, pulling her blaster as they sprinted toward the raised platform. Behind them, General Kor cut through one of the ancient warriors with brute force, his energy sword glowing red. David's heart pounded. They wouldn't make it in time. Then, a gunshot rang out. Luria stumbled. David turned in horror. She was clutching her side. Blood, deep violet blood, seeped through her fingers. She collapsed to one knee, eyes wide in pain. Kor smirked, his weapon still smoking. That was a warning shot. The next one ends her. David's hands trembled. His mind screamed. He could feel the weight of the cube in his palm. The key. The entire vault. The warriors. The mind core. The legacy. None of it mattered if she died. Kor took another step forward. "Make a choice, Carter." David's breath came fast. He had seconds. He looked at Luria. She was staring at him, struggling to breathe, but she still managed to whisper, "Don't let them take it." David closed his eyes, made his choice, and threw the cube into the mind core, awakening the past. The moment the cube touched the core, the entire vault exploded with light. The warriors froze. The mercenaries screamed as their weapons shut down. David could feel it, a pulse of energy, like the heartbeat of something enormous and ancient. Then, the walls themselves began to speak. Not in words, not in sound, in memory. David's mind was flooded with visions. He saw the rise of humanity's golden empire, the betrayal that led to its downfall, the last survivors sealing the mind core away, waiting for the one who would return. And then, a final vision. Zarvex, his friend, standing beside the mind core, recording a message. David's heart clenched as the hologram flickered to life. "David, if you're seeing this, then you know the truth. You were always meant to find this. You were always meant to carry it forward. This is the last piece of our history, and now it's yours." David opened his eyes. The vault hummed. The warriors turned toward him and knelt. General Kor stumbled backward, stunned. "No, this isn't possible." David stepped forward, his body burning with the knowledge of the mind core, his voice steady. "You wanted the key. Here it is." He raised his hand. The warrior's eyes blazed with light. Kor's face twisted in rage. "Kill him." The warriors charged, and the battle for humanity's legacy began. Unlocking the truth. The vault was alive. Light surged through the chamber like a storm, swirling around David as the warriors of the Forgotten Empire rose at his command. General Kor snarled, his red energy sword crackling in his grip. Around him, the surviving Crimson Maw mercenaries struggled, their weapons short-circuiting from the energy pulse that had erupted from the mind core. Luria, still clutching her wounded side, looked up at David with wide silver eyes. "David," she whispered, "what have you done?" David barely heard her. The knowledge of the mind core was inside him now. It flooded his mind with visions of the past, of towering cities that once touched the stars, of fleets that spanned entire galaxies, of a time when humanity was not just surviving, but ruling. And then, the betrayal, the war, the fall. David's breathing was ragged as the last echoes of memory faded, leaving him standing in the present, the weight of the past now pressing against his shoulders. He clenched his fists, staring down General Kor. "You wanted the key," he said, voice sharper than steel. "Then fight me for it." The battle for the last throne. General Kor lunged. His energy sword sliced through the air. but burning red arc of death. David barely had time to move, but he didn't have to. One of the ancient warriors intercepted, raising a glowing blue blade to block Kor's attack. The impact sent a shockwave through the chamber, throwing dust and energy sparks into the air. The other warriors rushed forward, engaging the remaining Crimson Maw mercenaries. The sound of metal clashing and blasters firing filled the air. David helped Lariat to her feet. "Can you fight?" he asked. She winced but nodded, gripping her blaster. "I won't die on my knees." David smirked. "Good, because I'm not losing my only friend today." Then he turned, just in time to dodge Kor's next strike. Kor was fast, too fast for a man his size. His blade sliced through the air, inches from David's neck. David rolled, barely escaping the second blow. Damn it. He wasn't a warrior. He was a pilot. A nobody. Then the mind core pulsed, and something changed. David felt it, a pull, a connection. The warriors weren't just ancient soldiers. They were linked to the core, to the one who held the key, to him. Without thinking, David reached out. One of the fallen warrior's blades flew into his hands. It hummed to life, a blade of pure energy, glowing blue like the core itself. Kor's eyes narrowed. "So, the core is choosing you." David adjusted his grip. "Looks that way." Kor smirked. "Then let's see if you're worthy of it." The duel. David barely had time to react before Kor attacked again. The warlord was relentless, his strikes coming fast and heavy. David blocked the first, then the second, but the force behind Kor's blows sent him staggering backward. Kor pressed the attack, slamming his blade against David's, pushing him down. "You're not a warrior," Kor snarled. "You're just a weak, pathetic scavenger playing hero." David gritted his teeth, struggling under the pressure. Kor's blade inched closer. Lariat, struggling to aim through her injury, fired a shot at Kor's side. But the warlord's armor absorbed the blast. He didn't even flinch. David's arms shook. He couldn't win this fight. Then, the mind core's voice echoed in his head. "You are not alone." And suddenly, he understood. This wasn't just about fighting. This was about leading. David let go of the blade with one hand, and instead reached out. The warriors behind him answered. With a flash of motion, two of them attacked Kor from behind, forcing the warlord to turn, blocking their strikes. David used the opening, twisting free and slashing upward. His blade cut across Kor's armor, sparks flying. Kor stumbled back, rage burning in his eyes. "You little..." David didn't let him finish. He charged. Their blades collided, energy crackling, power surging through the chamber. The ancient warriors pressed forward, overwhelming the remaining Crimson Maw mercenaries. David fought with them. Not just as a soldier, not just as a survivor, but as their leader. And slowly, the battle turned. The fall of General Kor. Kor was losing. His mercenaries were dead. His armor was cracked. His movements were slower. David could see it in his eyes, the moment he realized he had lost. But Kor was a warlord, and warlords didn't surrender. With a roar, he lunged one final time. David didn't step back. He stepped forward. Their blades clashed. Then David twisted, using Kor's own weight against him. The warlord stumbled, exposing his side. David didn't hesitate. With a final strike, he drove his blade through Kor's chest. The warlord gasped, staring at the glowing weapon now buried in his body. His red eyes flickered. He opened his mouth, but no words came. Then, with a final breath, General Kor fell. Dead. The last of the Crimson Maw was gone. The chamber fell silent. David stood over Kor's lifeless body, chest heaving. Then, slowly, he turned to face the warriors. They looked at him and knelt. The Mind Core's voice echoed once more. "The last heir has proven his strength. The throne is his to claim. David stared at the warriors, at the remnants of an empire long forgotten. He had started this journey as a nobody, a cargo pilot, a lost man with no purpose. But now he was something else, something more. Lariah limped forward, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You did it," she whispered. David exhaled. Then, after a long moment, he turned back to the mind core, the last piece of humanity's forgotten past, waiting for his command. And he finally understood. This wasn't the end of his journey. It was just the beginning. A new beginning. Silence filled the vault. David stood motionless, staring down at the lifeless body of General Core. The glow of his energy blade slowly faded as he exhaled, the weight of the moment pressing on him like a star collapsing in on itself. The ancient warriors, the last remnants of the forgotten empire, remained kneeling around him. Their eyes, if they even had eyes beneath those helmets, were locked onto him, waiting. Lariah stepped beside him, wincing as she clutched her injured side. "David," she said softly. "It's over." David barely heard her. His gaze drifted to the massive, pulsing structure in the center of the chamber, the mind core. It wasn't just technology. It wasn't just history. It was a decision, a choice that would shape the future of the galaxy. The burden of an empire. The mind core pulsed, and the voice of the ancient system echoed once more. "The heir has proven his worth. The throne awaits." David swallowed hard. "And if I don't take it?" A pause. Then the core responded. "Then the last hope of the forgotten empire will fade. The knowledge within will remain sealed. The warriors will sleep once more, and the past will stay buried." David clenched his fists. For 100,000 years, humanity's true history had been erased, replaced by the Galactic Senate and the Orion Alliance. No one even remembered what had come before. Now he had a chance to restore it. But did it deserve to be restored? He thought back to the visions the mind core had shown him. Humanity's empire had been glorious, but it had also been a war machine. It had ruled with power, with conquest. It had fallen for a reason. If he reawakened it, would history repeat itself? He turned to Lariah. "What would Tarvex do?" he asked quietly. Lariah's expression was unreadable. "Sarvex chose you, David. Not because you were the strongest, not because you were the smartest, but because you could make the choice that he never could." David looked back at the core. The ancient warriors remained still. The vault hummed, waiting for his answer. He had spent his whole life running, living job to job, never staying in one place. But now he couldn't run. The fate of an empire, of history itself, rested in his hands. David took a deep breath and made his choice. The choice. David stepped toward the mind core, placing a hand on its pulsing surface. A surge of energy rushed through him, lighting up the chamber. "I am David Carter," he said, his voice steady. "And I am not your emperor." A shocked whisper seemed to ripple through the air. The warriors shifted slightly, as if confused. The mind core spoke. "You reject the throne." David nodded. "I do. But I'm not going to bury you either." He looked at Lariah. "Sarvex didn't leave me this just so I could become another warlord. He wanted me to make sure the right thing was done." He turned back to the core. "I won't rebuild an empire that fell under its own weight, but I also won't let history be erased." The pulsing light of the core seemed to shift, as if it were considering his words. Then it spoke again. "A new path must be chosen." David took a deep breath. "Then let's make one." Awakening the lost knowledge. The core shifted, its massive crystalline structure beginning to glow. The energy in the chamber intensified, and suddenly, holograms erupted all around them. Images of ancient cities, starships, laws, culture. The truth of humanity poured out, filling the room with knowledge unseen for millennia. David turned to Lariah, his heart pounding. "This is it. She nodded. The history they tried to erase. The warriors, once rigid and bound to their old ways, stood slowly. They no longer looked at David as a ruler. They looked at him as something else. A guide. A protector of the past, not its conqueror. The knowledge spread, and the galaxy would never be the same. Aftermath. A new future. Days later, David and Lariah stood aboard their starship, staring out at the vast expanse of space. The ancient vault had been sealed, but its knowledge had been released into the galactic networks. All across the stars, people were learning the truth. The Senate tried to suppress it. The Orion Alliance tried to control it. But it was too late. The past could never be erased again. Lariah turned to him. So, what now? David smirked. I don't know about you, but I've got a whole galaxy to explore. She raised an eyebrow. You're just going to go back to being a cargo pilot. David chuckled. Not exactly. Let's just say, I think the universe could use a couple of will cards. Lariah smiled. I think I like that. David sat back in the captain's seat, gazing at the endless stars ahead. He had walked into this story as a nobody. Now he was something more. Not a king, not a warlord, but a man who had changed history. The engines roared to life. And with a final grin, David punched the throttle forward. Their ship vanished into hyperspace, leaving behind an empire that had once been lost, and forging a new legend in its place.